Production of Detroit Black Journal is made possible in part by a grant from the men and women of Mishkan.
Hello, Detroit Black Journal, you're on the air.
Hello, I'm a University of Detroit student.
Hi, this is Susan. I heard what you just said, and I disagree.
My name is Bill Harris. I have a question to ask.
But I'd like to respond to
Thanks
that.
again.
I think that's mythological and short.
Live from the studios of WTDS, Detroit Black Journal proudly continues its award-winning years of history, news, and current affairs from a black perspective.
Good evening. Welcome to a special edition of Detroit Black Journal. Tonight we're very pleased to bring you a young man who took the music world by storm. His first LP last year, Najee's Theme, went gold, and he was nominated for a Grammy. This year he's back with his second LP, Day by Day. We're very pleased to bring you Najee. Najee, thanks very, very much
Oh, thank you for having
for
me.
being with us this evening. Let me ask you, as I do most of our guests, we'll start from the beginning. You grew up in what was considered a very musical family, did you not?
Well, my father was a cellist. However, he wasn't much of a direct influence because he passed away when I was very young. My mother, I would say, was perhaps more of a direct influence in an indirect way because she liked a wide variety of different kinds of music, and she used to play them all the time. And she was particularly fond of the sound of the saxophone. So I fell in love with the sound just based on hearing it all the time through her. Some of my playing influences coming up were Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Junior Walker, King Curtis, Stanley Turrentine, and a whole bunch of others.
Well, you know, you talk about the mix of music that you have and your influences from Charlie Parker to Grover Washington. Do you see that mix in your music?
Yeah, well, that's been my experience as a musician. I've been fortunate to play in different musical idioms. So I think in the music I play, I try to have a little combination of all of that in there because it's just natural in my experience.
You didn't start out with the saxophone.
No, I started with clarinet in school.
Why was that?
Well, the saxophone chairs were taken in school at the time. And so I was forced to play clarinet based on what was available at the time. Fortunately, playing that instrument, it didn't take me away from playing saxophone totally because my teacher encouraged me and told me that if I could play clarinet, I can certainly play saxophone.
And then you got the first sax at 14? That
well,
was
the
yours.
first one that I owned, yes. My mother surprised me one day and came home with one.
Now, was it a thing of constant practice, always in the room or down in the basement or wherever playing it?
Well, as much as I could at that time. I think I practiced as much as time allowed me during that period. And then also I played a lot in little local bands that we had in the neighborhood I came from, Jamaica, Queens. So I spent a lot of time doing that during those years.
Jamaica, Queens is famous for a number of different artists coming out of that place.
That's true, yes. It's one of the, we call musician-filled neighborhoods. A lot of people come out of there. Some of the notable people such as The System, Cameo, some of the members of Count Basie Band live in the area. I mean, some of the names escape me. Tom Brown, Run DMC. Yeah.
Now, you went to Bronx Community College and then you went on to the New England Conservatory of Music. Did you find that that education helped you along with your music?
It was a good experience because that was my first time taking music academically. Before I went to college, I had prior experience. I'd been on a tour already, and it was a good experience for me. However, there was some good and bad to it, being a musician, because I found that you couldn't gain all of the experience in school. You know, you had to go beyond school to do it. So, being in Bronx community, I was exposed to a lot of the New York City musicians from other areas, Bronx, Queens, and we all met in that one particular place. And, you know, had a great time doing what we were doing. And then some of us decided to audition for other schools and go to other places. And when I went to New England Conservatory, that was my first time really being exposed to a classical environment in such a heavy dose, I should say.
What was it? What was the big break that took you from the Bronx to where you are today?
Well, I had worked with a lot of different people, toured and did a lot of record dates in New York City. And in 82, I was trying to find my own record deal. However, we weren't very successful with it at the time. It wasn't as popular instrumentalist. And then one particular day, I had done a session for Melissa Morgan, who signed to Capitol Records and at the time was signed to Hush Productions. About a week after that, Hush Productions approached me, asking me if I would sign to their company because they had an outlet over at Capitol Records for an instrumentalist. So it somewhat came to me.
Let's talk about Najee's Theme, the first LP. Tremendous success for you. It went gold. You were nominated for a Grammy. Were you expecting that kind of success?
Oh yes, I didn't expect all that we got It was somewhat of a surprise to me, yet not a surprise because we had put a lot of time in working, touring and, just promoting the record. So I certainly didn't expect to be nominated for a Grammy. All I was doing is sharing my experience as a musician, and I was very grateful that people responded to it.
You're with Hush Productions now, and they've got a large stable of artists, Melba Moore, Freddie Jackson, and others. What does that company do for you?
Well, in my particular case, they were the ones who made the negotiations for the record deal. They handled all of the production. Well, they assisted in handling the production, as well as serving as a management team in public relations, everything.
When you talk about a production company and what they do for you, you get into the legality of the business. What do you tell young people about learning the business and what they have to do with it?
I think that they have to be educated, try to educate themselves. If they're not versed in representing themselves, they have to get qualified people that can represent them. And but I would stress that knowing as much as you can about how the business works is more to your benefit than not, because this is a business that you can get lost in the shuffle very easily. And so the more you know, the better off you will be.
Let me ask you a little bit about the success of the saxophone in the last few years. People like David Sanborn, Kenny G, George Howard have been very, very successful. Is it simply that people are ready for that kind of music?
Well, I think there's always been an audience for it. People like David Sanborn, Kenny G, they've been out there for years doing what they're doing, and have helped to create an audience that's always been there. And the success of Najee's Theme, my first debut album, was a testimony of a void market that hadn't been paid attention to. So I think that that people are coming around and wanting to hear an alternative, not always wanting to hear the same type of things all the time.
Wynton Marsalis has taken a hard line on what jazz is, and that he considers much of the music that contemporary jazz artists are doing now isn't jazz at all. How do you see that?
I think what he's saying makes a lot of sense. And his sentiments on that issue are very strong, obviously. And I think what he's saying does make a lot of sense. However, I find that the word jazz means different things to different people. If you were to talk to someone like Wynton Marsalis or people who are familiar with Charlie Parker, Stanley, John Coltrane, and so forth, then I would have to agree that that is what true jazz is. However, for a younger generation who may not have been exposed to that for whatever reasons, look at what I may be doing as jazz. I don't totally disagree with that. I think there are jazz elements in what I do. I don't look at it as total jazz or traditional jazz, but there is some jazz influence based on the nature of the instrument and the demands on the player to study the instrument.
We see you there with the saxophone in your arms, and a lot of people have talked about how the saxophone almost takes on a human quality and that they caress it like a woman. Is that how you feel about yours?
No, I can't say for me that it's like that. I don't look at it as a woman. Or I can't say I have that kind of emotional attachment to the instrument itself. It's just a vehicle for my particular expression. So.
Well, since you have it in hand, could you do us a favor and just
you would want
play
me to
with
play
it a little bit?
after just waking up.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that. Let me ask you something else. We talk about some of the things that you've had in terms of success with the first album out. When you went and did the Day by Day album, the second album, which is climbing the charts as we speak, did you feel any pressure because of the success of the first LP to come back and it had to meet, if not surpass, that one?
Well, of course I had that pressure on me, but I didn't let that be the dominating factor in what I was doing. My concern was just to come back with an album that was a follow-up. I didn't want to divert too much from what we had already established, and since I'm an artist that's still developing an audience, I didn't want to do something that may have alienated the last audience. We found that a lot of my sales came strong in the R&B and jazz contemporary, so I wanted to keep that momentum going at this time with a second album, rather than, you know, some people say, well, why don't you do some traditional things on the record? I personally didn't feel it was yet time. I think as I grow as an artist and as the audience becomes more educated, and there'll be room to do that.
All right, that's the first single from the new album, Day by Day Personality. You wrote that.
Yes.
What do you do when you're thinking about a song? Does it just you hear a little something in your head, or how do you put things together like that?
Well, that particular song, I was fooling around with the melody, and I was over a friend of mine's house who co-produced the record, Wayne Brathwaite, and we were sitting at his keyboards fooling around, and I started playing some chord changes. He started playing a drum beat, and then he came up with a bass line, and before we knew it, that's what we had. And then we were confronted with a title, and I was looking at something he had on his dresser saying personal. So I said, let's call it Personality. He said, okay. And then he put the vocals to it, and that's how it came about.
Is that how most of your music comes about, or when you're sitting down writing? Is it just a thing of, you know, you've got a little something in your head and you just go work it out?
Sometimes. Sometimes I could have a drum beat playing in a drum computer and then just play chords on the piano, and it might come that way. Sometimes it may be a melody. It comes different ways for me. You know, I don't have any spiritual or spooky way it comes.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I've got to ask you this, as I'm sure everybody does when they meet you, and you even tease a little bit when you're on stage saying that I'm from New York and not Nigeria, but the name Najee, what does it mean?
Well, it means secret friend or intimate friend of the Creator. It's from the Arabic language, and the reason why I use one name is because it's similar. It has the impact similar to what Sade has. Once you hear it, you know who that person is. You don't have to spend a lot of time locking into who the identity is. And it's worked for me. I think it's had a certain mysticism, and it is my legal name.
Your live performances, one of the things that you do is you go out in the audience and you play the saxophone. Do you feel that it's important to have that one-on-one connection with the audience?
Oh yes, because you know, I think people, it is a mistake I think the jazz musician has made, or the instrumentalist, years ago. I mean, there's a few of us that can turn their back on the audience and get away with it. I'm not one of those people. And I think that, you know, when you're just playing a cold horn to a large audience, you know, it tends to get a little monotonous, you know, then they want to feel some, it's not like a vocalist, you know, vocalists tend to grab the audience a little easier. But for the instrumentalists, we have to work a little harder at making it exciting, especially the music I play. It has more of a, you know, more of a down, you know, mellow kind of feel, so we have to make it a little entertaining. And me going out in the audience is letting the people know, hey, you know, I'm just an average guy who does what I do, and they like to touch and they like to see, you know, and it just gives them a feeling of, hey, you know.
You tell a real interesting story when you're on stage about a gift you received. Why don't you share that with us?
I was at a radio station in Pittsburgh, and one day, this particular day that I was there, this woman named Willie Harvin called up, and she told me that she had a saxophone that her late husband had left behind. It's one of the better made saxophones, the French Sombre tenor saxophone. And she told me that she just wanted me to have it. And at the time I thought she wanted money for it, but it ended up that she didn't. She just wanted me to have it. And we made arrangements to meet, and she gave me the saxophone. And I thought it was very nice of her, because people just don't give away those kind of valuable things these days. And I felt quite honored that she thought that much of me to have it. And it seemed as though it was something that, if I was her, I would have wanted to hold on to it as a memory or something of a person that was dear to you, but she felt quite honored giving it to me. So everywhere I go, I tell that story.
That's a great story. Lastly, what about the future for Najee? What do we look for? What do we see?
Well, I think I'd like to, as well as keep developing as a player and as an artist, I think I'd like to produce other artists, some of the less established artists, people that are hungry, you know, don't have as much of a reputation yet to develop, or do have a reputation to develop. I'm working with a flute player right now named Tony Henson, and we're developing something for him. I just got called for movie score. I don't remember the name of the movie. So I'm looking forward to doing something with that. And, you know, perhaps get more into production, and that's a side of me I think I would like to develop.
Najee, thanks very much for being with us this evening. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
This is it, the second LP by Najee. It's called Day by Day. And if you want some really good music, something to listen to and get a good feeling, this is the LP to get. Hope to see you soon. Good night.
Detroit Black Journal is a live television production of WTVS Channel 56. The opinions expressed on Detroit Black Journal are those of the participants and not necessarily those of the staff and management of Channel 56. Local broadcast of Detroit Black Journal is made possible in part by the men and women of Mishkan, people who proudly say, helping is our job.